So you're here because you are tired. You've been talking about the same old topics. You've been around the same people. You've used the same microphone. You've only talked. Just some of the reasons why you may be burnt out of podcasting. Welcome to Life is Art Reality. My name is Jessica, and I'm here to talk to you about why you might be burnt out of podcasting and some ways that you can come out of this alive with your podcast if that is what you decide that you want, if you decide you love where you're going deep down and you don't quite want to just give up or let go and you don't want to quit like I did. Quit and came back. And so the first step I would actually suggest, and this is going to be the hardest thing to do because if you're somebody who loves helping people, you love talking, it could be about anything. It can be about cooking. You could have a show about cooking, talking, just straight up hit record and then talk about your recipe for that day. You could read quotes or read passages from books on your show. You could be, a lot of the solo work is very much, I think, underestimated, really. And, you could be reading your own writing on there. If you don't write, you could definitely be reading other people's books and, kind of explaining why they should buy the book. Anything. You could be interviewing somebody extraordinary, and it could be really, really nerve-wracking for you to find the right person to interview and for you to even get them to do the interview in the first place. Any reason, any kind of podcaster, any kind of podcast that you have. So the first step, the hardest step that I would say is to take out the altruism. Take away the fact that you're podcasting for other people and you're doing this to help people. Take that out. Take that out completely. Because that is going to cripple you eventually. That is going to make you doubt yourself. That is going to make you doubt why you're there. Am I helping people enough? Is what I'm talking about relevant? Is what I'm talking about, does it even help people? And then, it's going to make you doubt the way you do things in life. So if you're doing like a show about cooking, for instance, it's going to doubt the way you script or plan a recipe. You're going to doubt the way that you, if you talk a lot about life on your show, you're going to doubt about how you do life, really, because you're talking very deeply about a topic. And you're putting out, there's podcasters who will literally risk their entire reputation and put their whole life out there, much more than even I would. I mean, I put a lot of my life out there on the show, just talking and trying to, give examples. I don't get as personal as they even do. I don't get very specific with my life in particular, but more like lessons about relationships and stuff. And so I even have done this with my first burnout. And I ended up quitting podcasting, and I wanted to blame, it's probably, eventually I blame the platform because I'm like, well, it probably is the platform. And even from the beginning, I was already kind of like, I had my hand in blaming the platform. And then I started to blame the company of the platform. And it was a whole thing. And if you watch my channel, you might find a video or two talking about that. That's fine because I already apologized for it. But I had did that because I was doubting why I was there. And it was a 5-year thing, and then COVID had hit, and I just kind of like didn't know why I was there. So it wasn't like it was a sudden burnout that happened over a bad day. This was like a 5-year period. And then I realized I loved it so much, it had nothing to do with the platform. So I got back into podcasting. I just started a fresh new show. So that was definitely an experience to share. The second burnout I had recently, just life getting kind of very personal and very, very life-changing. And I started to incorporate more examples of experiences in life. And I'll talk about kind of the other ways that I changed my formatting in a second. But I was able to kind of like, it wasn't quite as bad of a deal. I was just like, I'm taking a break. Now I'm not taking a break. So I recorded this a couple times, and I probably have had better intros than this, but I'm hoping the middle of this video will turn out a little better. So you can understand why it's okay to get burnt out, and it's okay to have a break, and it's okay to change your mind. I do it all the time, and my listeners are very, very patient with me, and it's a huge appreciation on my part. I appreciate my listeners so much for that. And but I want you to have the same kind of experience as far as being able to get back on your feet. Hopefully not the same experience. Don't quit like I did. Because I lost a whole 5 years of a podcast. So don't just jump and delete your podcast. I'd been back on a year now. It's fine. I've recovered. But talking about all I do is talk. That might be something. Because what happens is, that is a lot of what a podcast is. If somebody were to ask you what a podcast is, I know my response has been a talk show. Really, it's just shared audio, and a lot of it, most of it is talking. It's topic-based, and it can be anything. Some of the best podcasts I've heard have been on a plane, have been outside, have been people just living in their houses doing things, have been people on their phone talking to each other. I've heard podcasts where people were just like taking care of their families, and they were just on the show, and they, it's crazy. Like, people put their life out there. They're very, it's very, very, very inspiring, to be honest, because it's like, geez, they can put their whole life out there, and I relate to it. And it's kind of crazy how it works. So even if you wanted to think of it like I'm shy to talk about myself, even, go listen to podcasts. Like, maybe you've never started a podcast before. Go listen to podcasts. And you'll see how much of themselves people will put, like, to where they live on the podcast. It's crazy. And it's, again, very helpful in deciding, I think I could actually share this little part of myself and I'll be all right. And start with that. And then eventually you come to a good balance that works for you. So the way that when you are just talking and that's all you do, and maybe you're a little bit tired of that, maybe exploring other creative outlets to integrate into your podcast could really work. And one of those things is, especially if you talk by yourself a lot of us who are doing the podcast thing tend to have a very deep kind of a creative streak, or a kind of a nerdy streak, really, to where we just could be bookworms. We could be writers. And so that's definitely in any podcast platform that you have, whether it's app-based like Anchor, or whether it's web-based like Buzzsprout. You can post your writing in the show notes right there. Or you can use something like Podpage to kind of make a whole web page with your podcast embedded, so that it doesn't matter, and it's just like sharing a link with people. And I have that set up with my Anchor, and you can have your writing right there. Also, Anchor integrates with WordPress, so you can certainly do that. You can have your your WordPress will come up with your podcast name, and then you can blog in there and then put that link along with other links in the description. But maybe you're putting too much into one episode. Like maybe you have the opposite problem where it's not so much that it's boring because you're just picking up your microphone and talking, or your phone in my case. I don't think a microphone is the most important thing in the world. I know that's a very unpopular belief, but it's kind of from my experience. But when it comes to just picking up your device and talking, but maybe you're planning too much for each episode and you really just want to talk. And so what I have found is changing the way I actually plan each episode and not being quite as repetitive on, I don't want to use the word consistent, because you do want to at least be consistent with maybe 3 times a week or more if you really love podcasting and you want to keep going with it, or at least 1 time a week, no compromises, and really make that very firm. But to change your actual planning for your this is the second thing, to change how you plan each episode depending on the kind of episode. So for like a 15-20 minute thought on a meal that you want to cook and you want to talk about it on a podcast, the recipe, the health benefits, etc., you may not need to write anything in that episode. You may not need to include resources if you're talking about, well, maybe for that you'd want to include research behind the health benefits of the meal. But maybe if you're talking about, you're telling the story of how you helped your dog get better, or what food you decided to give your cat and how your cat reacted specifically. That is an experience-based story, and you don't necessarily need to include resources. And you don't necessarily need to always write. And so if you just want to pick up and talk to somebody about it, that could even be a podcast episode. That could be a reason to start a podcast even. If you really just want to talk. And so that actually ties in taking the altruism out of your podcast. I hate to tell you, like, we all want to help people. We all want to bring value to others, but just know that you're helping yourself as much as maybe somebody who might be listening on the other side. This is as much of a talk session for you as it is for them. And every time I pick up and talk on my show, honestly, I feel a lot better when I'm done, and I feel like I just had a therapy session, or just a good long talk with a best friend or whatever. And I don't necessarily get to feel if I've helped somebody. I don't necessarily get to know. I've gotten very lucky, and I've talked to people who have listened and they say that I have, or they say that it helps them every day or whatever. And that's really, really nice. That's happened after 5-6 years of doing it. And it's brought me, it's really touched me, but I don't always get to know. And so what I say is, this really helped me. I got to talk about this part of my life. I would feel awkward going to somebody. I would feel like I'm making life all about me if I'm talking to them about this. Or if I want to talk to somebody about something, it's a little bit less, it's not as direct as it might be on a podcast, or as it might be off of a podcast, rather. So, like, if there's something very direct that you think, it could be a very subjective opinion. And if you talk, like I talk a lot about life on my show, it could be very subjective, and it's not always about being right or wrong. But if I talk about it on a podcast, it doesn't affect other people. They don't have to take anything personal, and vice versa. If I listen to somebody on a podcast, they can word something however they want, and they're not talking to me directly, so I don't have to worry about taking anything personally either. You know, a podcast is a very intimate place to talk, it's a space where you're really sharing a lot. And so that's what I like the most about it, is I feel like I just got to talk to somebody. I just got to spill get everything off of my chest. I got to talk to somebody, not just about my life, but about things that I've learned that other people can learn. But because when you're talking on a show, like let's say you love cooking so much. I keep using that as an example. Or let's say you love writing so much, or you love books. Let's say there's a book that you read and nobody around you understands why you'd read this certain book, but you understand why you'd read this certain book. So if you did an episode about this book and you got to talk to a microphone, whether that's built into your phone, your computer, whether you did go out and decide to get a nice mic, whatever it is, or a headset or whatever, it doesn't matter, because you got to talk about your book. And you couldn't talk to you couldn't talk somebody's ear off and bore them and make them listen to you obsess over your book, so you talk about it on a podcast. And it doesn't matter how many listens. Maybe one other person listened, or maybe 10 people listened, maybe 50 people listened, maybe it doesn't matter, 1,000 people listened. It doesn't matter. You got to talk to somebody about your podcast. And it's very subjective. You know, you could say, well, it's a recording and then you're sending it off and then they're hearing it. That's very true. It's not a direct interaction with other people, but you're still talking, and you're talking for the purpose of sharing it with other people. That recording is not sitting there collecting dust. So that's kind of the, going into it, is to summarize a little bit here. Taking the altruism out of it, you're not just doing it to help other people. You're doing it for yourself. And it should be something that you're doing for yourself so that you enjoy doing it. Don't plan every episode the same way. Make different types of episodes with different types of planning. If there were episodes that you wanted a little bit of research to back it up, or maybe instead of thinking it like, I'm going to start a research project for my podcast, how about watching, listening, observing things that you already like, and then just talking about it later on an episode, and then including the link to your favorite show that talks about it, as if you would share it with a friend, instead of making it, oh, I have to start this project and it's got to be with this and this and this, and it's got to have this much research to back it up. No, just come in and share like you would share with a friend. This show, you got to check this out. I watched this last night. It talks about this amazing meal that I want to cook. And then maybe do a follow-up. Okay, I cooked this amazing meal, for instance. Or keep it on the same show and don't feel like you have to send it until maybe after you've actually cooked the meal, for instance. And just talk about it as if you're talking to a friend. Let's see. Third thing is to speak and picture somebody there when you're talking on a podcast. And if you are talking with someone and you have a guest, act as if you're including somebody else as part of your conversation. So, for example, I could say something like, hello, you're listening, and thank you for listening. And as a listener, I want to share this book. This book will be in the description below for you listeners to read when you're done with this episode. Let's say I do something like that. Another way I could do this would be, hey, I'm so glad you're here with me right now. I want to share this book that I'm just so excited to talk about with you, and I'm glad you stopped by so that maybe you can read it if you can when you're done listening to this episode. Something like that, so that you feel you're reminded that you're talking to somebody. It's more natural for you. And you remember why you're here, that as much as, maybe it could feel like the opposite of number 3, being that you are doing it for someone. Like, someone is listening. And if you get on a platform like Anchor or Spreaker, you have advantages. Anchor, Spreaker, Podbean has communities already kind of built in. They're the 3 platforms with built-in smartphone apps. And they have, you can podcast right from your phone. And so you have those advantages of communities. And so it's very easy. You can go in, do a podcast, or listen to other people's podcasts, and you can voice message or comment into their show and get to know them through their own show. They could do the same with you, and you can kind of develop like friendships that way. You can develop social interaction just that way. And so then you're kind of a little more guaranteed to have a community. If that's what you're after. The web-based podcast platforms I don't know too much about, but like Buzzsprout, for instance, has some really cool features. Some of them, it could be Buzzsprout. Some of them have features where the website will take and help you convert a video card to share out to social. Some of them have a little more analytics that you can use to get to know where your listeners are listening from. Certain kind of things like that. I don't know too much about the web-based platforms. There are so many people you can just YouTube podcast platforms, and you'll get a whole list of like pros and cons of all of them, because all of them have different feature sets, interfaces, and advantages that you can take and decide which platform if you haven't podcasted yet. So, So getting back to number 3, since I spent a lot of time on number 1 and number 2, if you don't feel like you can do this, then you might want to consider that having a guest is the only way that you'd want to podcast. And maybe you're not a solo podcaster, or maybe you feel like, somebody has to be there with you, so that you feel like you want to maybe share a conversation. That's just saying, the type of podcaster you are, like, that really what you want to do is share your experiences by just recording the conversations you're already having. And a lot of extroverted podcasters will do this. People who don't even like reading, or people who communicate in different ways other than reading and writing. Maybe they communicate by video more. Will take a lot of their YouTube content and put it into a podcast, or they'll take their live streams and put it into a podcast. So that's where I actually contradict myself in saying, making kind of a stereotypical statement from the beginning, because that is what podcasting kind of started out as. It was a very nerdy, like introverted, deep work kind of a focus for a long time, for years, like from 2006 to probably now to like And then I think like in 2013, 2014, it got probably more diverse, give or take a year, whatever, give or take a couple of years. So yeah, not to stereotype with that kind of thing. And maybe you've been sitting here all along thinking, well, that's not true, because I'm not. I'm going to do a podcast that is more of those things or less of the deep work kind of stuff, which I'm glad that podcasting has diversified. I really am, because I enjoy a variety of podcasts, and I feel like in a lot of ways, because people are sharing their conversations and they're going out, it's made me understand that multitasking is a part of life. It may not be the healthiest thing mentally, but it is a part of life. And so it's kind of what we tend to do. And so if somebody's doing that on a show, and they're very natural in that environment, that's a huge talent as well. But the bravery thing really comes from sharing your life, parts of yourself that a lot of people don't feel like they can actually talk one-on-one with somebody about parts of their life, but they can share it on a podcast. There have been podcasters that has touched me just by the fact that they broke down and cried on a podcast because they are so passionate about what they're talking about, and they're maybe reading something or feeling an emotion that's touching them very deeply. And I'm just like, I can never share that part of myself on a podcast, but it's just, it makes me feel, it reminds me that we're not alone, kind of a thing. And so, you go to your podcast app, one that's built into your smartphone, or maybe you pick one that you like with different features. There's a ton of podcast players out there. Just type podcast player in your app store, Play Store. And you'll find like so many. When you go to the front page, you'll find a lot of them. You can search different topics a little bit, kind of like YouTube. You can go Google search podcasts on certain topics, and maybe you'll find things that way, or just kind of search any web search, any search engine really. And you will find ones that you really like, and just like do a lot of listening for a while. If you're like thinking about starting a podcast, do a lot of listening and just, see all the different experiences you'll get in audio, hear all the different experiences you'll get in audio. And yeah, that's pretty much what I got when it comes to recovering from podcast burnout. I'm definitely somebody who has had it. Sometimes though, it is good to take a little break. I didn't want to make that like the main thing, and I didn't want to say that in the beginning, but sometimes, it is good to take a break, get out of your own head. Because sometimes we take ourselves very seriously as a podcaster, and we're like, okay, we got to get back to actually life, because I feel like now I've talked so much, I'm not learning anything anymore, I'm not sharing anything anymore, I'm getting repetitive. You go do life, you're like, I got to pay attention to life in the present right now. And then eventually you're kind of like, oh my God, I want to talk about this. I want to share that. And then you end up, once you do that, you just feel so much better, so much lighter. And what I like about it is when you do share very intimate stuff, intimate things about yourself, as far as like feelings about life or other people or any kind of interactions like that, you can almost gain more to talk about when you're doing like very subjective opinions like that. And it's a little more of a healthier way, I think, to share your opinion, especially with politics or relationships or friends, family, parenting, any of these very intimate feelings that we might feel about these things. Our minds do tend to change a lot. That's why you don't always want to be direct with someone. You want to have an outlet, because sometimes when you go to be direct with someone, you're like, wait a minute, I think I just seen another part of them, or I learned something about them that might cause them to make me feel this way, to do whatever it is that they do. So therefore, I don't actually, my feelings towards them have changed. I've become more understanding of them. I agree more with where they're coming from versus wanting to be right. And so, so sometimes like that'll also give you more to talk about if you're doing kind of a life-based podcast. This could apply to cooking, of course, if you're, you learning a new ingredient to add to a recipe, you could always change your mind and be direct on a podcast. You don't have to worry about talking to somebody and being direct with them and being embarrassed about, I should have thought of this ingredient sooner, or anything like that. I should have thought of adding mustard to my deviled eggs sooner, duh. Like, even just something like that. I'm not like a cook or anything, so that's kind of a very simplified example. But, if you're hungry, feel free to, well, this is almost over anyway. Feel free to stop and go get some deviled eggs. And, yeah, that's pretty much podcast burnout. I don't really know how to end this, really. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time because I do have experience with this, at least some experience. Again, I'm not a big podcaster. I don't really do the whole guest thing. I don't really go on other people's shows. When it comes to other people, I enjoy talking more one-on-one and sharing different things that might help them with their podcast, or seeing what they have to share with me, that kind of stuff. But I feel like the podcast is kind of more of an outlet. And that's where I'm a little bit different, I think, than other people. And I appreciate the solo work that people do. But I also love when there's a mix podcast where you have some solo episodes and then some guest episodes. Because then they kind of share both. They're very intimate and they're very social at the same time in that way. So, but there are, other solo podcasters too that can be can very much talk to you as if they're really talking to you, in their own way, sharing a lot of opinions. And again, it's really cool to see, especially when they're reading their own writing, when they are demonstrating things that they've learned about, even things that they might use technology-wise, or whether they are sharing a very subjective opinion, even a political one, where it's like, I'm not a political person really by nature, but if you can make it relatable and interesting, I might listen to you for a little bit. I might listen to you and I might kind of understand why you have that political view, even if I don't have that political view. Because, at the end of the day, we're all humans trying to connect together. And so if it is about cooking, if it is about life lessons, if it is about creativity, or just, you're having guests on that talk about different things, or maybe you're just a show where you're just sharing, this is who I am and I have a variety of things that I do and talk about. That's cool. The important thing is to don't delete your podcast. Don't quit. If you do really need a break, if life does happen, you just say, hey, I am needing to focus on life, and you do a little episode letting everybody know that you're stepping back for a while. That is kind of nice to do, so that nobody thinks that you just disappeared. Nobody thinks that you don't care, or that you're too busy. Nobody wonders where you are and then suddenly unsubscribes from you or will leave. And so what you do is you just say, hey, I'm stepping back for a while. Or even if you think you're not going to maybe do this for a very long time, or you're kind of done with it, you just maybe talk about it for a little bit. And what'll happen is you'll feel so much better. It's so ridiculous. You'll be like, I got that off of my chest. Nobody around me would understand what I'm even talking about or what a podcast even is, but I was able to talk about it on my podcast. And it becomes this habit. You're like, no, I really do need to talk about things. I think I'll keep this. I think I'll stick with this. I think I'll stick around. I really do need to share. And in that connection and in that selfishness of wanting to get things off your chest or obsess over a recipe, you're helping yourself to help other people. And so ultimately that's what it is. Thank you for tuning into this topic. I really hope that this has helped you. Definitely do some other YouTube searches. do some web searches on different podcasts that you can connect with, interact with those people through the ways that they give you within their podcast. And I don't usually talk about this kind of stuff, so I thought this was fun. I am kind of techie sometimes, so if you want resources like that, just feel free to stay tuned. Subscribe if you'd like. But yeah, when it comes to wanting to find people to collaborate with, or when it comes to wanting to ask questions and interact with people, the best place that I can recommend, she's a podcaster that has been around a long time and who's been helping me keep going, and she has a community called Podcast Support Community on Facebook. Her name is Maria Humphreys. Definitely go interact, check her out along with her podcast. She talks a lot about this kind of stuff. Go interact with other people there. See what they got. See if you can get a collaboration going on a podcast, or if somebody can help you start one. That is the best place to go for a community. And especially if you've made it this far into the video, you definitely have earned this as a resource for you, whether you subscribe or not. So thank you for watching and staying tuned. I hope that you've learned a takeaway from this. And I hope to talk more with you on different things, possibly like this. So take care, and here's to hoping you start a podcast, or hoping that you are getting back on your feet and getting back to talking. And definitely more, if you have a podcast already, definitely share your podcast here in the comments. I know I would love to see what you have going. And if not a podcast, maybe a podcast idea we could exchange. So, but definitely the link to the Facebook group Podcast Support Community will be in the description below.